What's up, guys? I have another video for you, and as you can see, it's incredibly blurry right now in front of the camera, and that is because I have a macro lens taped onto the lens of my phone, and I'm gonna try and get an up-close video on how I adjust and kind of tune my fountain pen nibs, whether it be my pens or a friend's pen or whatever. I never believe I'm an expert, and this is a hobby I happen to do for fun, and I try and put up helpful videos regardless of whether people think they're helpful or not, or whatever negative comments I may get. But just recently I actually had a subscriber, or a viewer at least, send me a private message, asking me about a fountain pen that he got recently, and it just wasn't writing well. It was writing scratchy. He had flow problems, and I figured, I've spoken about adjusting nibs before on my channel, but I don't think I've ever really done a clear video on it. And at least from the YouTube videos that I've seen, no one's really attempted to film anything up close. And whenever you go and ask for advice on adjusting nibs to make them smoother or make them write wetter or drier, people always tell you what to do, and they always say, oh, obviously you want some magnification, like a 10 times loop or whatever, but no one ever really shows it in video, so I figured I would try and do it. You won't be able to see, but let me bring it up close. Actually, let me fix the focus. I know someone had complained about the autofocus on the camera kind of giving him a headache. I apologize for that. But I just kind of use my autofocus for everything. Here you can see I have a Noodler's ink pen. This happens to be a clear demonstrator Conrad, but instead of having the standard Noodler's nib, I have a steel number 6 nib. It's branded Knox. Who sells this? I think the site is called X Fountain Pens. They sell these number 6 size nibs. It kind of works. I do kind of have to heat set the feed a little bit. You could probably just see a slight bit of gap there. But honestly, I've written with this pen. I've inked it up. I actually specifically got this pen for Noodlers, not Noodlers, for Jeroboam's Stormy Gray. That ink leaves a lot of particles in your pen, so I would advise you be careful with putting into pens that are kind of difficult to clean. The beauty of Noodler's pens is you completely take them apart. Obviously the nib and feed are friction fit, and you just can't get all out and rinse it out really easily. But the nib on the feed that I have set like this, it was writing a bit dry for my taste. I generally like my nibs to write on the slightly wetter side, but I definitely don't like gushers. For me, if the flow is so wet that my E's start filling in, and it's not because the nib is too broad, but just because there's just so much ink being placed onto the paper, that's a little too wet for me. But I do like a semi-wet writing nib, and basically to make the video a little more interesting, I went ahead and severely misaligned the tines. Obviously this is very drastic, although I have seen nibs come from factories just as bad as this, if not worse. So basically with nib alignment, it's pretty simple. I think a lot of people are a little tentative. They always hear people say to be careful, take things slow, whatever, and they never really bend the tines enough, or what I may consider like a more proper way, in order to really align the tines very well. And what they're looking for may not necessarily be what I look for when it comes to tine alignment, but I've been very happy with the nib tuning that I've done to basically all of my pens. I'm no Dimmeister, I'm no expert. I don't do this for a living, but I have tuned a lot of fountain pen nibs just purely based off of the pens that I own, the nib units that I've bought and experimented with, and friends' pens. So the key thing when aligning the tines is, first I do it in a few stages. First I get a general alignment in. So right now you can see that the right tine, at least on the video, is kind of very high up. Now obviously I know that this tine is very high up because I had bent this out of shape myself. It doesn't really matter which tine you want to bend to realign the nib. In this case, I'm actually going to bend it down. But the key thing you want to remember is that it's always better to bend the nib tines downward against the feed versus bending the tines upward. Because what happens when you bend the tines upward is that you start lifting the tines away from the feed. And once you don't have good contact, it makes it so that you can have erratic ink flow. Wow, this is really, really difficult. And I don't have very steady hands, as you can see from the video, so I do apologize if this video kind of makes you nauseous or gives you a headache or whatever, or if it's not very clear. I'm trying to do this all through the screen and not looking at it, so it's kind of tough to get it to focus really well. You know, that's the problem with high magnification, is that your FOV and your focal distance is really short. But anyway, what happens when you start lifting tine away from the feed? Let me see if I could demonstrate it from the side. Is that you'll start lifting the nib off from the feed, and as soon as you lift the nib off the feed too much, you know, that'll obviously break capillary action, and you just won't get any ink flow. So generally, I recommend that you bend the tines towards the feed, and what happens is that basically guarantees that you're always going to keep the tine in contact with the feed, but you do have to be careful you don't bend it too much and end up kind of cracking or damaging the feed in any way. There are instances where obviously you won't be able to bend this tine down anymore, and then you'll have to bend the other side upwards. And in situations like that, I always recommend that from the side profile, you want to always just put pressure on top of the nib, basically right where the feed would end. And then as you bend upwards, like so, you're essentially just bending the tine of the nib past the point of where the feed ends. So instead of bending the nib all the way from the breather hole, where you'll basically start lifting the tine away from the feed, you want to bend it at the point, you know, around here, where the feed is no longer making contact with the nib. And I've actually gone ahead and just misaligned that completely. So anyway, the video is taking a bit too long, so let me just go ahead and do it. So you can see here, the right side tine is a little too high. I'm actually going to bend it down. What happens is a lot of people, they bend it to where it's basically aligned, and then they stop bending it. And what happens is, you know, metal has some memory to it, and you do kind of have to force it beyond that point. So what you want to do is bend the tine further down beyond the other tine, and that way when, as you see here, that way when it springs back, you can see like now it's no longer, oh sorry, you can see now it's no longer as high. Now as I was bending this tine downwards, it took a lot of pressure to bend, and I don't really feel like I could very easily bend this tine down anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip the nib around, reverse it. So now originally the tine that was too high is now on the left. And what I'm going to do is, like I said before, I'm going to pinch the nib right at where the feed ends. And then I'm going to bend that tine upwards, keeping constant pressure against the top of the nib with the feed. May take a few tries to kind of get it where you want it aligned. You know, basically that right now, it's general alignment. You know, it's aligned close enough where if you write with a light enough hand, or if you're writing on very smooth paper like Clairefontaine, you won't really feel any scratchiness. I'm kind of a stickler when it comes to nib smoothness. I don't believe that nibs should write only as well as the paper you use them on. Just because, people always say like, oh, if your nib's scratchy, why don't you just use Rhodia or Clairefontaine? And in all honesty, you don't always have a choice. At work, I use very cheap paper. That's just what my company happens to buy and put into the copiers and printers. So I don't have the option of using very nice paper. Sure, at home I use nice paper. My go-to pads are Rhodia, and my go-to notebooks are Clairefontaine. But that's just not a valid option, for when I'm filling in data sheets and stuff at work. So all my pens, I prefer to write very smooth on cheap paper. And then obviously when it comes to things like Rhodia and Clairefontaine, they'll write even smoother. So when I check for very fine alignment, as you can see right now, the Tine that's on the right-hand side of the image, it is slightly higher than the left. Now I'm just going to get my loop so I can get a better look. Yep. So now it comes time to make very fine adjustments, and this is where you want to go slow. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to pinch the nib between the feed and my finger, and then I'm just going to bend it out of position just a little further than before. I know it seems like a lot, but honestly that's kind of where you have to bend it. And if I feel like I have to bend this Tine a little too far up, away from the feed, in order to get it properly aligned, then I will just go ahead and switch it back up again and try and make small adjustments to the other Tine. Alright, that's pretty close. Now, before I make any final adjustments in terms of Tine alignment, there is anything involving wetness I do want to kind of take care of now. I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see. I'm going to try and get it as close as possible. There we go. But you can see, you can see the gap between the tines, and then as it goes up, basically at the middle of the tipping point, you could just see a sliver of white from the background, and that's obviously light passing through the tines. But the tines are a little too close for my liking, and this nib was writing a bit on the dry side. So what I do, in the past, what I've done was I would just slide brass shims in there and kind of just pry them apart. I've come to realize that's not the cleanest way of doing it. I have seen the work of some nibmeisters, and that is what they do. And I guess I can understand, as a business, they're trying to get good turnover time and stuff. But I feel it looks kind of ugly, and I do kind of have a nib that I feel was a bit ruined. And when you do kind of pry the tines apart like that, and you don't do it very evenly, it's really tough if you ever want to make the nib right drier to get them properly, closed back up. So, you could do that. I used to do that. Another method that, Stephen Brown had posted a video of was basically kind of holding the nib down against the feet and then bending the tines upwards. And then when you do that, you'll kind of spread the tines slightly. I don't like doing that. I think that kind of, I don't want to say it ruins the nib, because, if it's your pen and it writes well for you, then fine, it's not a big deal. But just undoing something like that is very difficult. Nib blocks for straightening out bent nibs, they're very expensive, and it's not a skill that I even necessarily say I have. I have straightened out some nibs that were misaligned with pliers, but those are all hand done. They didn't look the cleanest. I just got the nibs to the point where they could write again. So my preferred method is actually to physically bend. Wow, this is going to be tough because I have to be so close to the camera. But my preferred method is to physically bend the nibs apart from the tines of the nib apart from each other. And what I usually do, at least with a nib like this, where you have broad shoulders like this, and the shoulders are basically higher than the breather hole, is I will grip my fingernails, and that's actually why I'm doing the video now. Because you kind of need longer fingernails to do this, so it's going to be right before I clip them. But I will put my fingernails there, and I will apply pressure against the side of the feed, And as I do that, the tines will basically spread apart. And just like when you're aligning the tines, the same thing goes. You really want to pull apart the tines further than what you actually wanted to gap at, just because of the memory effect. Obviously, when you're first starting out, you definitely want to go slow. You don't want to do too fast in case you open up the gap too much. And at that point, that kind of makes it difficult to close them back up again. It's a lot easier to close up tine gap if you can remove the nib completely from the feed. When it comes to a nib like the Lamy nibs in their like Safari line, where you don't really have shoulders that you can grip on, at that point I would suggest you just kind of pull the nib out and then just run a shim through it and just gently prime apart, because you obviously can't do this technique. But in most most fountain pen nibs, they are made so that you can actually, they're made in a very traditional manner where they do have shoulders on the nib. But, okay, let me see. I have to get super close, and my thumbs will get in the way, and this won't be in focus. And I've gone ahead, hey look, my Pelican. I've gone ahead and knocked the macro lens out of the way. So sorry about this. Like I said, this is not going to be the most professionally done video. I'm actually literally just holding it on with a piece of tape, so that sucks. Okay, there we go. Back in action. Okay, how am I gonna do this? I mean, I want to be able to show you the gap in the tines, but I can't get close enough to it without kind of knocking into the camera because of focal distance. Well, okay, basically if let me try it with my index finger. So, if you can see it from the top, there we go. So basically right now, that's how the tines are now. Basically no gap where the tipping is. And as I pull the tines apart, you can see they spread. And then if I don't put any pressure, I'm not bending the tines upward. I'm literally just trying to pull them apart like so. And then what you're going to do is basically get it to the point where you're happy with tine gap. It's a lot, I'm just going to do this off camera. It's a lot easier, sorry. But I like to bring it up to a light so I can just see in between. You want to try and put as even pressure as possible on both tines. Okay, and let me just check against the loop. Okay, so it is tough. It does take quite a bit of pressure, but you can manage it. So basically now if you look from the feed upwards, you can see that I've increased the tine gap quite a bit. Like I said, until you kind of get a feel for how much of a time gap you want for the wetness that you want. You do want to go slow. Hands are so shaky. But now you can see the white background through the entire nib from breather hole up to the tip. So I know this will actually write quite a bit on the wet side. Maybe a little too wet, but I'll have to try it out and see. And at this point, you'll want to just check your final alignment like so. You don't want to put any pressure against the top of the nib when you're looking underneath magnification, because what happens is when you do that, it can actually spread the tines a bit if you put too much pressure against the feed, and if one side or the other is out of alignment or in alignment, you may push it away from that. So from this angle is the best way that you're going to see the sweet spot, and this alignment actually looks pretty good. What I also like to do is I also like to check from the side profile, like so, and make sure everything is aligned from the side profile. What happens is when your nib is misaligned from the side, you'll actually see a glint of light reflect back, like so, and that's basically light hitting the inside of the tine and then reflecting back out. So I like to make sure that that is as flush as possible, which once I bring the nib completely flat to my view, I shouldn't see anything. The tipping's slightly uneven, so you can see a little bit of the top, but it's not a big deal. And the same goes for this side. Just bring it over, and yep, it looks pretty good. I'll double check again from the top. Tine alignment looks pretty good. Maybe I can actually bump this up a little bit. When you make small micro adjustments, you don't have to necessarily worry about lifting the nib off from the feed. It's more when you're adjusting the nib quite a bit. And, you know, once again from the top, now you can see the tine gap that's there. And I'm not going to ink up this pen yet. I can already pretty much tell you that this pen will write quite well. I like to kind of try and keep things clean. I like to be able to see the tine alignment and the tine gap very well. So I've basically kind of gotten up to a policy where almost all of my nib adjustments are done with a dry pen. I feel like if you have a pen that's inked up, people say, oh, you know, you want to go and you want to test how it feels, you know, how it writes and all of that. And honestly, like, this is just my opinion. This even goes along with nib smoothing and grinds and stuff. You should be able to do all of that stuff with a dry pen. And you should be able to see. Like, I don't want to just be able to feel. Like, sure, I can feel a lot of things when I write. But then there's lots of things that are probably imperfections that are there. That just because someone doesn't feel doesn't mean the right situation won't make those imperfections show up. And, you know, for me, I want a pen that writes well and writes relatively universal at most angles and at a reasonable amount of pressure all the way down to the lightest of feather touches. So, my nibs, I polish and I tune them to be relatively smooth on pretty cheap paper. And the way I see it is, if my pen can write almost perfect or as perfect as I can get to it on the most non-ideal conditions, then when it comes to the most ideal conditions, they'll still write perfect. I don't want to make it so that there's a bunch of parameters for writing enjoyment. So one last final shot to close of the nib. Once again, check the alignment from this angle. Looks good. Check it from the side. Also looks pretty good. Check it from the other side. Yep. You could basically kind of see where the foot of the nib is, and that's basically where the sweet spot of the nib is going to be. And yeah, I hope you guys found this video helpful. You know, if anyone has any questions, you know, more than welcome to send me a message or comment. You know, constructive comments, like, I will answer. I will try and answer to the best of my abilities. If people ask questions and comments, I'll try and answer them. Private messages, if I can help, I'll usually answer them. Well, that's great. Just got a message. But, you know, I don't know. Negative comments I tend to ignore. Actually, one final shot. This beauty of a nib here. It's an old 250 nib, I believe. That was originally an oblique medium. And it was cut to a reverse oblique italic medium. And I can't get it to focus at all. Here, maybe better look from the bottom. And this nib is basically a great example of what I feel like a nib should be. You know, a lot of people say, oh, you shouldn't really write with oblique nibs unless you have to or you have a rotation or anything. You know, this nib used to belong to my friend. He had Mike Masuyama grind it, pretty sharp, I think a 15-degree reversed oblique italic. He did not like how it wrote. I tuned it up for him. I basically smoothed out the edges, so it was definitely a lot less scratchy when it came to side strokes. Not any fault of Mike's. You know, there was just kind of a miscommunication between what my friend wanted in the nib and what Mike thought he wanted. And he thought that he wanted a sharp italic, which was not the case. But instead of sending it over to Mike, you know, my friend just had me fix it. I went ahead and fixed it. It wrote a bit on the dry side. He still didn't really love how the nib wrote, but I mean, he was happy enough with it. And when I bought that gold trim blue demo M600, this nib was in that pen, and since I bought the pen, now the nib is mine. I went ahead and I just aligned the tines a little better, smoothed it out a little more. I polished it really nicely. You know, I do a lot of hand polishing on my nibs now. It takes a lot of time, but I feel definitely allows for better writing performance. And I also went ahead and just kind of gapped the tines a little more, just for it to be a wetter writer. And you know, for someone like me who doesn't really need an oblique nib, I can write with no problems with this, you know, medium reverse oblique italic nib on cheap paper, and it writes very smooth. It writes very well. If I can hold the angle properly, it won't catch in any directional strokes. So, yeah, I mean, that's just my opinion. Alright, this video is way too long. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys found it useful. If not, oh well, I tried. And I hope it's not super blurry and stuff when it comes to actually viewing it. Just because it's hard to do things under magnification, I guess. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.